Welcome to the Holy Post. Why do so many women find Christian organizations difficult places to work? Katelyn Beaty says it's the Bro Code within evangelicalism that's to blame. She's back to define what it is and why it needs to change. Then, immigration is once again a hot political debate, and it ranks among the top issues for many white evangelicals in recent elections. Last month, a group of Holy Posters visited the southern border to see what's really happening, and we met with church leaders on both sides as well as border agents. This week, we debrief that experience and share what we learned about the real border crisis. All of that, plus dead pet psychics and air passengers horsing around. Before we jump in, it's officially the holiday season here at the Holy Post, and we're celebrating with a couple of different things. Now through the end of November, we're offering a special discount on annual subscriptions to Holy Post Plus. So if you've been on the fence about subscribing, now's a great time to join and see what you've been missing. And if you're already a Holy Post Plus subscriber, consider gifting a subscription to a family member or friend. We've got instructions on the website for how to do it, as well as a PDF certificate you can download and print to give to your loved one on Christmas Day. And while you're on the website, make sure to check out the brand new merchandise we've just released. Whether you're looking for yourself or hoping to finish up your Christmas shopping, you're sure to find something for the Holy Posters in your life. Okay, here is episode 592.
Hey there, this is Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I am here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And I'm here with Katelyn, but a different Katelyn. This is exciting.
Indeed.
Yeah, Katelyn Beaty is
the
here.
lesser of the two, I think.
This is the OG Katelyn.
Yeah, you were our Katelyn before Katelyn was our Katelyn.
Yeah.
Katelyn, Katelyn Beaty was here when? Long ago.
2018,
Yeah.
2019.
She sat in regularly because she used to be a neighbor of ours, living in the area and working alongside Skye at one point. You guys were at CT at the same time, right? You overlapped.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I left 3 times, so there was a lot of, back and forth where...
Yeah. And when you...
But yes, we did. We actually worked on some projects together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
but
would you
this is our
say...
city project.
Katelyn, would you say those collaborations were the highlight of your time at CT?
I would not, but
Okay. Okay.
But I no offense to Skye, I had mostly forgotten that it was a while ago.
Yes.
Quite forgettable.
And
Yes.
I've blocked out some other elements of my time at
Right.
CT, so I don't dwell on it that much. But I would say, working with Skye was positive neutral.
Was not a low light.
It was not a low light.
Not
That's
a
what I
low
meant to
light.
say.
Yes.
And given CT history, I will take that. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we have to dive any more into that mess, it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Today's episode is sponsored by Sundays. This is Phil. I have a dog. You have a dog. We love our dogs, and we gotta feed them something. Fresh food with human-grade ingredients is a better way to treat our dogs than that old bag of whatever that stuff is. Sawdust and cow bones? I have no idea. But fresh pet food is expensive and inconvenient, and that's where Sundays comes in. No, not the day. The new dog food company that makes air-dried dog food from a short list of human-grade ingredients. It's healthy, with beef, chicken, and digestive aids like pumpkin and ginger. It's convenient. Unlike other fresh dog foods, it's zero prep, zero mess, and zero stress. Sundays is shelf-stable and ships right to your door. And it's affordable, costing 40% less than other healthy dog food brands because they don't waste money shipping frozen packages. We've got a special offer for our dog-loving Holy Posters. Get 35% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost or use the code HOLYPOST at checkout. That's sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Upgrade your pup to Sundays and feel good about the food you feed your dog. And thanks to Sundays for sponsoring this episode. Okay, Katelyn is not only, she's a journalist, she's an author, she's a speaker, she's a podcaster. She co-hosts the podcast Saved in the City with Roxanne, what's her last name?
Stone,
Roxanne Stone.
saved by the city.
Saved by the City.
Saved by the City.
Okay,
like,
so it's not
Saved by
about
the
your
Bell.
eternal salvation. It's about getting out of the suburbs. Is that what it's about?
Phil, that's very that's perceptive of you. That is a strong theme of the podcast. But we now just talk about faith and culture. We've had lots of the same guests you all have had. We've talked about everything from the masculinity crisis recently to singleness in the church to the Israel-Hamas war. So yeah, your listeners should come check it out.
Yeah. So when you talk about the masculinity crisis, do you hold up Skye and I as positive examples of masculinity? Did we come up?
I think
Wow.
if you're mentoring men in your life and modeling Christian virtue, that's the best that we can maybe hope for. You didn't specifically come to mind as
Okay.
a model, but
Okay.
now that you mention it, it's probably okay.
Well, you could go back and edit it, I guess.
Phil, maybe we
The
are.
episode came out last week, so we would, I can't promise you time travel at this
Okay.
at this stage.
Okay.
Maybe we fall into the neutral, not negative. What is it you
Yes.
describe my
Yes.
time at sea?
The not
Positive neutral,
Yeah, positive,
Positive
neutral,
neutral.
and
Yeah,
and
there you go.
not a low light.
not a low light.
Not-
Yep.
not
so
a- not a
yes,
low light.
regarding the masculinity crisis, Skye,
There you go.
Phil,
Thank
not a
you.
low light.
So I guess if we just never really come up on your radar, that's probably a positive.
Yeah, I that's actually one helpful metric.
Yes.
Like if
Yeah,
I
you
don't
and-
read about you in the news, you're doing
Yes.
better than a lot of other folks.
Yes, you and Julie Roy's. If we don't come up on her radar, it's also a definite positive. Okay, since Katelyn hasn't been here in a while, we of course have to run the full gamut of emotion with her in our journalistic coverage. So we start out with some animal news. Horse escapes on a Boeing 747, forcing the Boeing 747 to return to New York City and land. A week ago Thursday, a horse escaped inside the cargo hold of a Boeing 747. The Atlanta Icelandic flight from New York JFK to Liège, Belgium, declared an emergency while still climbing as it reached 31,000 feet. We are a cargo plane with a live animal, a horse on board. The horse has broken out of its stall. There's no issue with flying, but we need to go back to New York as we cannot resecure the horse. This is a thing that happened.
So
Okay, yeah.
yeah,
The-
this is
the-
a cargo plane. There's no passengers.
Yes, yeah.
It's
That's
just
important.
it's a cargo plane carrying horses and various other livestock. I'm
I
assuming.
don't know how many horses. It may have just been the only horse. May have been a horse and a bunch of oxes, and the horse running around looking through, luggage. I don't know. But here's
Horsing around.
Here's the real. Yes, exactly. Here's the and of
sorry.
course, if the horse fails to follow directions from a flight attendant, that's a federal offense, right? So the horse.
I mean, you've been hearing so much about like passenger behavior
Yeah,
on
yeah.
flights. This has to be a new low.
So the horse is now in federal prison. But this is the part that really gets me. In order to make the return to New York, the pilot had to dump 20 tons of fuel into the ocean. 20 tons of jet fuel because a horse wouldn't cooperate.
I don't understand. Like, why would they have to
They
lighten
don't-
the load to go back?
Because the plane can't land when it's fully loaded because it'll damage the plane and the runway. So it has to lighten
I see.
itself before it lands.
So it was either
I
throw
see.
off the fuel or the horse. And if you've thrown off the horse, then you really don't need to land. So what's the point?
I have multiple questions about this whole scenario.
Yes, you do?
Like, first of all, how do you secure a horse in a 747?
I'm sure. Well, think about all the horse races that happen all over the world and think about how many horses are flying in a typical month to go. You've got all these Saudi Arabian horses, and then they've got stuff in Dubai, and then they got to go to Kentucky, and then they got to go. There's horse frequent flyers.
I'm not saying they don't fly. I'm just curious. How do you secure a horse?
Well,
is it like
Like a
in
giant
one of those
In a
trailers?
cage.
a crate,
It's-
just like
yeah.
your puppy. Just
Yeah.
a big one.
Put it under the seat.
But- But don't they stand up?
Yes, they stand up. They stand up in their tall crate, horse-sized crate.
So this horse got out of the crate and is just roaming around.
Yeah. The question is, if the problem was, it's dangerous to fly with a loose horse, how is it not dangerous to land with a loose horse so that you can put it back in the box and then fly again?
But the captain or the pilot said that they weren't at any risk flying, but they had to return. I think it's for the horse's
Yeah, right. It was
safety,
dangerous
because
to the
if
horse. But it seems
because
like the most dangerous part is landing. Once you're in the air with the horse.
He would just be bumping around all over the place.
Yeah, you land and he's going through boxes and they put on the brakes and the horse flies to the front of the cargo hold. Oh my gosh, I hope he's okay. I just don't think they handled this right at all. I think they just say, he'll be fine.
They just continue on the belt and
This is
deal with
outrage.
it there.
Yeah.
This is outrage.
Because you continue on, what do you have to do? Also, you have to land with an unsecured horse.
But you could hit, clear air turbulence over the Atlantic, and then you have bigger problems.
That's the horse's fault. He should have known better.
Well, I think it's whoever secured him incorrectly's fault.
That may be.
Something went wrong.
Unless it was an incredibly clever horse. We don't know. But
like Mr. Ed.
Speaking of misbehavior, was he talking? Was the horse at any point?
That should have been the headline.
I don't want to be in that box, Wilbur. If you have to be old enough to know that show to get that reference. In related flight news, gospel singer almost booted off Delta Flight for singing their new single. A Grammy-nominated gospel singer was nearly booted off a Delta Flight when she refused to stop performing her new single to the crowd. The plane was in the air. She was walking up and down the aisle. She just found out her song was nominated for a Grammy, so she decided she would perform the song for the whole plane. A flight attendant said, "Please, ma'am, stop it."
Please stop.
She said, "This is what God is telling me to do." She's doing what the Lord is telling me to do. I sing for the Lord, and my song is out on all platforms, and it's called "We Can't Forget Him." I want to share this with all you guys.
I think this is a Romans 13 kind of moment.
Is it?
Yeah,
clearly. She needs a little Christian nationalism in her life?
No. God has clearly given authority to the flight attendant. The flight attendant does not bear the sword for nothing. And she needs to submit to the authority of the flight attendant.
But God told her to sing. And so did the Grammy Association. Yes, Katelyn?
Well, I was going to say, I feel this woman's pain because God is often prompting me to sing loudly in public places.
Oh.
And it's hard. It's hard to submit to social norms and
yes, when you've got a song in your heart. What if
that the Lord is clearing?
Yes, if Katelyn is singing in public, what is it likely to be? We just found out you're an opera fan. Is it an aria? Or is it Taylor Swift? What's more likely?
Nope, it's Cher.
Wow.
The Taylor Swift of 1978? That's Cher?
1988, yeah.
Okay.
If I could turn back time.
If I could turn
that's
back
your go-to.
Back time.
Boy, that is a
Phil
song.
knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if I could find a way.
I bet she's singing that a lot lately, given her age.
That is a song that you cannot sing quietly.
No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And
you gotta belt it.
I get it. I mean, in seriousness, I think this is like terrible behavior. And if I were on that flight, I would be so annoyed. Like it's rude.
But would it make you think? Would it make you think more highly of Christians because of they have such conviction?
No, I would think that Christians are obnoxious because they're using this space as a personal platform to celebrate their own music.
When they should be using YouTube.
Or they should sit quietly next to their, seat neighbors and like be a normal person on a flight because everybody just wants to get from point A to point B.
What if she just hummed the song to the people in her row without their permission? Is that still bad?
I mean, it's less disruptive. If if her seatmates were liking it, she could continue.
So, Katelyn, if you were on this flight and this happened, would you intervene? Would you tell her to please stop?
No,
would you
because it would be Katelyn belting out "If I Could Turn Back Time."
I'd be like, you sit down because now it's my turn. No,
I've been on flights where the crew actually starts singing to everybody, and that's kind of weird.
But they have Romans
Spirit
13
Airlines.
behind them.
No, Southwest.
are these? Oh yeah, they that's kind of part of their bit, right?
It's part of their
Like
shtick. They have shtick.
Yeah, but they do it like in the middle of the
do.
flight sometimes.
Yeah, but isn't
Yeah.
that annoying when they do it?
It is.
Eh.
Okay, moving right along, because I'm moving right along, because, we don't get to talk to Katelyn very often, so we want to throw a bunch of stories at her to see what's been swirling through her mind. Recent headline in the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, that's serious news. Wouldn't you say, Katelyn? Serious financial news.
I don't
know
subscribe to it.
It's owned by the Murdochs, but it's serious news.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's not Yahoo News. It's not.
It's not the New York Post. Yeah. Okay. We're in agreement.
Which, as an aside, I think one of the most fun jobs in the world would be to write titles for New York Post articles.
Yes.
The level of like puns and wordplay that they get to do just seems delightful. Anyway,
Okay. Is that your favorite New York daily now that you're there? Because of
just
the
every
wordplay?
morning.
Okay. She charges, what does this woman do? See if you can guess. She charges $550 an hour for 90 minutes of her time, and she has a wait list of 7,600 people. Imagine, Skye, you have 7,600 people in line to give you $550 for 90 minutes of your time.
Okay.
I think you could quit
all
the
right.
Holy Post.
What's your profession?
Are you asking me or Katelyn?
What would your profession be? I'm asking you, Skye, because
like-
you didn't read the article, but she did. What would your profession be? You get $550 an hour for 90 minutes. 7,600
professional-
people in line.
Professional tick remover.
If it takes
say
90
more?
minutes to remove a tick, that's one heck of a tick. No, I don't even want to go any further with that one, Skye.
Okay.
Katelyn knows what it is. She's a pet psychic. And pet psychics are making their way from the fringe to social acceptability. We'll all have pet psychics in the future. What is a pet psychic, you ask? A pet psychic is someone who can talk to your pet and understand what they're trying to say, even if your pet is dead. Pet psychics are making their way from the fringe to social acceptability. Those who tell others about their experience with animal communicators, that's what they call themselves. We are animal communicators. They needed one on that flight to Belgium to say, "Horsey, what up? You got to go to the bathroom? You want a little set of wings?"
I sense you're experiencing anxiety. Let's
Yes.
take a deep breath.
Yes, let's just...
I communicate with my
Center.
pet all the time, and I don't get paid anything.
Do you do it psychically without speech? With just...
Yeah, sometimes.
Oh, okay. Well, Skye...
You give him a
Just
look,
just
and he
a
knows.
look. Yeah.
That's right.
People book sessions with animal communicators to unravel behavioral issues, to learn about preferences for end-of-life care. Do you think...
This is the dumbest thing. These people are so dumb. I'm
And-
sorry.
and
This
when
is
the-
unverifiable ridiculousness.
And when the time comes to make sure their pets are enjoying the afterlife. What's doggy heaven like?
What's-
Let's check in and find out.
Yeah.
Skye,
So
Katelyn?
I have a couple thoughts.
Okay. I just want to know, what does this tell us about us at this moment?
Yes.
Are we
Yes, yes, yes,
becoming more rational as we walk away from the religions of our grandparents?
To me, this feels like such a good example of the fact that we are not actually more secular. We are increasingly post-Christian. Like the secularization theory has not held, in part because in replacement of traditional religion and religious practices, you have just a panoply of kind of individualized spiritual experiences, paths. I think of this as part of that. The fantasy of being able to talk to animals feels like very primal. And then it's like these wealthy, privileged people who have the money to spend $550 for a 90-minute session trying to understand that their dog is essentially trying to say, like, I have to poop soon. like it just all converges to explain both like spiritualities all the available spiritual paths you can choose, and the commercialization of it, like the consumer practice of it. If you have enough money, you can have the spiritual experience with a guru.
See, this is why I'm so glad Katelyn's back, because you were able to pull some deep, meaningful observation from a completely stupid article.
Yeah, Skye refused to read it. It was beneath him. It was beneath him. Nikki Vasconez, a former lawyer, is now an animal communicator. Early in her career, a video she made about a session with a dog named Albie went viral. Skye, you're going to love this. Hang on, okay? Are you sitting down?
I'm
She
sitting
had a
down.
session with Albie the dog. The dog told her he didn't like his nickname. Okay, but
Sounds like she might be projecting.
but the dog did not specify what his nickname was. She didn't know what his nickname was, but the dog said it made people think he was large and overweight. Then she asked the owner what the dog's nickname was, and it was Big Al.
Well, I'm sold. I mean,
550 bucks. That's worth
I'm
it.
converted. This is real, y'all.
Wow.
So now
That's
they'll call him
hilarious.
Svelte Albert. And
Is it at all possible that the pet psychic did a little bit of online social media research on her client and realized that he calls his dog Big Al?
Hey,
Wow,
you're
that's really cynical, Skye.
Yeah, that's so cynical.
Yeah, it is.
So cynical. You think we have charlatans preying on people who are seeking answers?
Yeah.
Well,
a lot.
that's the thing with these gurus. I always want to know. I mean, I guess the question is, are they frauds? Are they hucksters? Another way of asking it is like, do they actually believe? I think some of them actually believe what they are selling. I think some of them have so convinced themselves that they are a guru or have like this special divine power that they really believe it. And then others are like, look at these silly people who are falling
Think
for
about it this way. I'll give them credit for this. It's brilliant in that if you claim to be a psychic, which I would argue the vast majority of claimed psychics are hucksters and charlatans. But if you claim to be a psychic and you use that psychic ability on people, they can verify whether or not you're getting it right. So they tend to use broad generalities to avoid really pinning anything down. But if you are a pet psychic, now that's smart, because you're dealing with a patient that can't possibly unverify the claims you are making. Talk about a great marketing move.
I want to be
it's just fantastic.
A pet psychic that focuses exclusively on deceased pets. So there's no real world way of, hey, you were right, and I changed his food, and now he is happier. He said he wanted different food. He didn't like the kibble I was giving him, and he wanted an orange collar, not a purple collar, and now he's happier. It's like, no, he's doing great. He sends you his love.
around.
He just met a cute little poodle named Chartreuse, and they're, building a family in doggy heaven, which looks a lot like Plano, Texas, he says. I don't know what that means, but that's what he said.
And when they're still alive, Phil, you have a dog. I have a dog.
Yes.
I can tell Steve's mood at any given moment because they're totally transparent. You can tell if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're scared, if they're
What we
hungry.
really need is cat psychics.
I was going to say, what if you went to find out how your pet is doing in the afterlife and the pet psychic was like, well, I have some bad news. They didn't make it to the good place.
They're in doggy hell.
They're suffering eternal conscious torment.
Yes, for puppies. Wow, that would be troubling. That'd be like, where did we go
dark,
wrong?
Caitlin.
Where did we go
I
wrong?
know. Like, actually, your cat was a terror, and now they are suffering the consequences for ripping up your couch.
It's karma for your kitty. Karma, okay, I'll let that one go. It's just we don't want to let go of having, first of all, there being a behind the curtain and then having some access to behind the curtain. We don't want to let go of that because we don't want to live in an entirely disenchanted world.
I also
That's
think
part of it.
I mean, I'm sure you all have talked about this before. The way that I'm going to just speak I'm going to paint in broad brushstrokes.
Go for it.
My
Skye-
generation-
Skye does it all the time.
My generation, the millennial generation, seems to have shifted its relationship with pets in ways that bother me. Like there's an ad on the New York City subway I see sometimes for a dating app, and it's a man and a woman, and they're standing there, and the tagline is like, they finally got serious about starting a family, and in between them is a picture of a dog in a baby stroller, and I'm like, no, like, we are not doing this. I love animals. I grew up with pets. I know that people have fierce, like, love attachments to their pets. I think, I think all of that is great, but let's not confuse the kind of relationship that this is. And I just wonder if it's people looking to their pets for some ultimate connection that they're not finding among other humans. And like, the answer to that is not to go to a pet psychic.
So I had a friend who used to live in Manhattan, and he and his wife had a dog, and then at some point they had a baby. And he was explaining to me that when they walk down the street in Manhattan and they have their baby and they have their dog, they are stopped all the time by people talking about how cute their dog is. No one stopped and looked at or complimented them. And the baby was cute. I'm not making it like it was worthy of. Yes, the baby was adorable. But like he says, there's something about the culture of Manhattan, where they were anyway, where everyone focuses on the dog. And the kid is like, oh, whatever. That's just a money trap. But the dog, now that's true love and affection.
Yeah. I mean, I don't live in Manhattan. I live in Brooklyn, but I see something similar in the way that people interact with other people's dogs. And I think it's a little bit weird.
Yeah, there was, I forget what book it was in, but it pointed out that there were some neighborhoods in certain urban enclaves where there were more stores catering to pets than catering to children. You know, and that in retail terms, now pets were a bigger business than the next generation of us. That's a little concerning. I'm just going to say that's a little concerning. Okay. I'm moving on. So we've got horses acting up on planes. We've got gospel singers acting up on planes. We got people acting up, paying way too much money because they want to talk to their dog, when really all their dog is thinking is more food? More food? Is there more food? I love you. Is there more food? I love you. Is there more food? Katelyn has a Substack. You have a Substack, correct?
I do.
It's called what?
The Beaty Beat.
Oh, that's cute. Beaty Beat. Beaty Beat.
I prefer to think of it as being august.
That's august.
And
Beaty Beat.
And credentialed.
Beaty Beat.
But based on the spelling of your name, it could be the Beaty Beat.
I know, but it is Beaty.
We'll do it.
And I
know.
realize that the pairing is confusing, but
It should
this
be
was something.
It should be the Beaty Bait. B-A-I-T. Can you switch
The
it?
Beaty clickbait. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. How did
how'd you miss
I
it?
lose this opportunity?
I know. You can thank me later. Okay.
This is why you're not writing headlines for the New York Times. Or, I'm sorry, for the New York Post.
Katelyn Beaty, recently writing on the Beaty Beat, wrote a piece entitled, "No Women Can Crack the Evangelical Bro Code, Why So Many Christian Institutions Chew Up and Spit Out Talented Female Leaders." Okay, this is disturbing.
I agree with her.
You do?
My completely unbiased opinion is that whoever wrote this is probably true and accurate.
Well, come back when you've lived it, and then we can talk.
I've lived it. I have lived it.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. She writes she says the pattern goes something like this. A woman takes a job at an evangelical institution, excited by its mission and ready to contribute her skills and expertise. Within the first few years, and especially if she has or aspires to a leadership position, she meets overt or covert resistance from a male colleague or several male colleagues, and one of them name will be Skye. Her job performance...
I was neutral or neutrally positive or whatever it was.
Her job
I was not a low light, Phil.
her job performance, Christian orthodoxy, soundness of mind, or institutional loyalty is called into question. There's an internal battle where a top leader or board is roped into to determine next steps, often after a crisis. The leader or board feels caught between competitive narratives, doesn't want to lose talented employees, has a mission to get on with, so the top leader or leaders will usually take the side of the man. In the warp and woof of evangelical institutions, 10 cents for using warp and woof, the woman has to go. Okay, in many evangelical institutions, women leaders are collateral for missional expediency and workplace culture and norms. And my first response is to want to say, oh, come on, that can't be like that broad. And so then I was trying to think in my head of all the evangelical institutions I know that are run by women. I didn't get very far. I didn't. That weren't started by the women that run them. Like Beth Moore runs her organization, Joyce Meyer runs her organization, but that were promoted like to the top of, Focus on the Family or Answers in Genesis or whomever. So Kaitlyn, why did you pick up on this? And do you? I assume you have a strong feeling for why it is this way, how it came to be this way.
Yeah, so the reason I wrote about this is because I have been in conversations with several women over the last several months who would say this described my experience. Like, I came in really excited about the mission. I'd maybe heard some whispers about this organization, but I thought I could change it. I mean, Karen Swallow Prior just wrote about this for Religion News Service about her time at Southeastern Seminary. Emily Highland, I don't know if we want to get into that story, but I wrote about this because I wanted to help give words to a pattern that I don't think is just about kind of individual interpersonal conflict, right? Or like, oh, this person just wasn't a good organizational fit, or she didn't do her job well, or whatever. It seems like something about lots of evangelical institutions, organizations, are resistant to promoting women to positions of leadership. And that when it comes down to it, women are seen as more of a risk or a liability than kind of a natural fit or strength. Like the institution sees itself as kind of taking a risk by having a woman leader, especially if she has a public facing role. I think about Karen again, who as I understand it, some of the problem there was that like people say horrendous and untrue things about Karen on the internet. And so then the institution is like, well, gosh, this is such a headache. And is it really worth it? Instead of defending her, it's like, this is too hard for us. In some ways, it's just easier for men in positions of top leadership to hire and retain and work with other men. And so that's why I called it the Evangelical Bro Code. It kind of this like default posture toward working with each other rather than promoting women.
And how much of that, sorry, go ahead, Skye.
I want to ask about a part of the article that we haven't touched on yet, which I really resonated with because I've seen this at various nonprofit Christian organizations I've been connected to, and that's the breadwinners dynamic. Kaitlyn, can you explain that, what you mean by that?
Oh, it'd be my pleasure. So when I worked at Christianity Today, I was in a handful of conversations over the years related to the workplace performance of male colleagues. Like, he hasn't done his job consistently for a long time. What's happening? And the rationale for retaining the employee is that he has a family to provide for. And on one, you can kind of hear that and think like, oh, wow, it's really nice for a ministry or an organization to be thinking about
generous
family and providing for a family. So I'm of course very supportive of people providing for their families. But when you step
and
back,
their dogs.
And their horses.
On the flight to Belgium.
When you step back and think about like women in those organizations and or people who are unmarried, is it kind of a way of saying like, well, we're not going to protect you as much because you don't have a family to provide for. I think for women leaders, it's assumed like, well, clearly you're not providing for your family. Your husband is, or your involvement is just kind of a nice side ministry thing rather than like core to what you and your family believe God is calling you to do. So the assumption that like we should retain incompetent employees because they have a family to provide for is gendered. It just is.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to talk about that is because, I've served in different nonprofits. I have been on the board of different nonprofits, and I've seen this dynamic come up repeatedly. And you're bringing out the gendered dynamic here, which is totally true. I've seen that as well. But I've had on more than one occasion to tell a leader, the mission of this organization, the mission of this Christian ministry is not to keep people employed.
Right.
As generous as that may seem, as magnanimous as it is to want to make sure people are providing for their families, that's not the mission of this thing. And as a board member or as whatever, I care about advancing the mission of the organization. And as compassionate as it might seem to retain people who aren't excelling in their role, it was interesting how frequently that comes up in nonprofit settings where we kind of excuse poor performance out of compassion rather than putting the mission first. And then you have the gendered layer on top of that.
Right. I think you're right, Skye, to identify a kind of blending of workplace family ministry that I think can easily confuse like why an organization or a ministry exists. Like it isn't at the end of the day to like make sure that people are paid so that they can provide for their families. It's to fulfill the central mission of the organization.
Right.
And if you have employees who are denigrating that, why would you keep them?
So let's
So
talk.
I'm the heartless one, I guess.
Oh, Katelyn. No, you're not, at least not a low light. I don't know, if you're a highlight.
Positive, neutral.
Positive, neutral, positive to neutral. So you go back 200 years ago in British and American society, and if you had said, hey, we're going to make this woman the head of this large company, you would have raised eyebrows. It's like, well, that's generally not the lane that women are in our society. And then society changes, but you've got the conservative church that is, really kind of resents societal change and is clinging to the lanes, that loves the lanes that genders were in, because it's easy to support it biblically. You can find verses and maybe take them out of context, but you can come up with a way to support it biblically if you want to. And so then we've got this kind of inherited sense of lanes. Even and you do mention, even you see it in some egalitarian, in some ministries that would say we don't believe that anymore. We're not doing that, but there's still some vestige, vestigial lanage, gendered lanage that we've inherited, where you're going to nominate her for that position? Oh yeah, that'd be great. But there's just a little, how do we get rid of that?
Oh, like how do we crack the Evangelical Bro Code?
Yeah, Katelyn. Yeah.
Oh.
How do we do
well,
it? How do we
come
do
back
it?
next week to find
do you think
my Substack on the
Do you think
solution.
it's more than just, well, in general, men are leaders and women are supporters. And that's, the Bible.
So I don't really know how much of this is rooted in belief. I think that plenty of people kind of construct the system of belief that they need to justify a more deeply ingrained instinct, which is that in a lot of these spaces, men just want to protect each other's careers and reputations. Okay. And whether that you then justify it by like some view of men's and women's roles. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't think the answer is to ask women to take responsibility for changing things from within, because of a persistent theme I am hearing from a lot of women is like, I got totally burnt in that place. The mental, spiritual, emotional cost of my trying to be there and make it work was like too much.
Yeah.
So obviously it has to be some kind of institutional leaders making a really concerted effort to challenge norms and maybe professionalize the workplace more. I think, obviously tons of mainstream workplaces are hostile to women leaders as well. It's not like the mainstream secular world has it figured out and this is just a problem in Christian circles. But I do think Christian organizations are behind the curve, even just on things like HR policies, right? Or, how do you ask for a pay raise without it being awkward or without it seeming careerist or whatever? So
right. How do you point out that the evangelist that runs the organization is behaving inappropriately with women at his massage parlors?
Yes, and perhaps even a more basic question is, why does our ministry founder own massage parlors? Is that like just raising some kind of flag?
He has a bad back. That's why.
Yes.
And it's hard to get a slot at other people's massage parlors, but if you own it, we're so good at rationalizing. This is why.
Or just like not seeing if you're inside the thing, just not even seeing the problems.
Yeah. Christine Lagarde is the head of the World Monetary Fund, or the World Bank, one of those big world global. And she got her job. She's a French woman, but she worked in Chicago for a long time at Arthur Andersen. She got her job running this huge thing because the guy who had the job before her was in a hotel room in New York City and ran out of the bathroom naked and jumped on the maid.
Oh, gross.
And he had been in line potentially to be the next president of France. And that
still sounds qualified.
Yeah, but it's like, oh my gosh.
Those French presidents don't always.
So instead we have an uber competent, woman now in that spot, but who could only get the job because the man had to do something so egregious. They say, well, now we have to fire you. You just jumped on a maid. Why does it take that much for us to say maybe this guy shouldn't have this job?
I think that underscores like the wide latitude that is given to men in these institutions who are either not like performing their job well, like they're just not a good leader or whatever, but also like getting away with all sorts of like the things that they can get away with.
Right.
That we still somehow find a way to justify and rationalize. A woman would never be given that kind of latitude. Well, she probably wouldn't jump on a maid. I hate to be gender essentialist, but like, jump in.
I wonder this is not part of your article, but narrowing it back down to sort of the evangelical nonprofit sphere. So much, when you get to the really top levels of those institutions, the C levels, especially the presidents and CEOs, so much of their work is fundraising and it's dealing with philanthropists and big Christian donors. And that is a heavily male-dominated environment where your ability to go play golf with a bunch of other donors who are men or things like that, there's a lot of relational dynamics there that I think there's just a higher barrier for a woman to be in that role and build the connections that open up big donors many times. I mean, there are exceptions to that. There are women I know who are doing it and doing it very well, but it's a very male-dominated world and it's highly relational.
Right.
And it just seems like a harder appointment to get to as a woman because a board's thinking, well, this position has to raise X number of millions of dollars.
Right. And his network is amazing. This guy's network is amazing. He went to Baylor with all the right people.
Yeah. So there's another barrier in all of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to underscore, the kind of relational and interpersonal rapport that is often required when you're in a position of leadership. And I think a lot of us feel like it's oftentimes just easier to relate to people of the same gender. It's more comfortable to hang out together, the golf course is a gendered space. I know women play golf, but like that means something specific. And I don't know how that changes. Like, I understand why in some ways it feels easier or more effective to put a man in a position of leadership to kind of play that role in the game.
Yeah, but it's one thing to say, the most qualified person that we've found for this fundraising job happens to be this man who has an amazing network. It's another thing to say there's an amazing woman that's just joined our organization and she could move to this next position, but it's making us uncomfortable. You know,
Right.
So the ability to nurture talent when it does show up in your presence,
Right. And
do
also
things
to
that are
kind of,
uncomfortable.
yeah. And then also maybe to question, like, okay, we seem to have built a lot of our fundraising activity around these golf events.
Right.
Maybe we don't need to. Like, maybe we can think outside the box and change cultural and institutional norms to better fit the types of leaders that we have available to us. But I just think that's really hard. It takes somebody being incredibly mindful and proactive.
And if we can't hit our fundraising goals, we might have to let some people go. And these men are the prime breadwinners for their families. So that can't happen. See, it goes around in a circle, Katelyn. It goes around in a circle like a horse.
Just as my eyes
like a
did
horse
when I-
self-reinforcing.
in the hold of a 747, just running around in a circle. Sorry.
Yeah.
Any final
That's a
thoughts?
sad note to end on.
No, let's not end on that note. Katelyn, give me a
Okay.
happy note to end on.
I really don't have one, Phil. I honestly don't.
Katelyn.
I don't have one.
No. Skye.
I want to believe there are men in plenty of evangelical institutions who see these problems and want to do something different.
Yeah. How many generations do we lag behind the larger business culture in changes like this? I'm thinking it's more than two.
I think it's more than two.
I think it's more than two generations.
How long is a generation? 20, 25 years?
Yeah. I mean, if you go watch Mad Men again, you realize, okay, yeah, they were doing it too. Definitely they were doing it too.
That's the 60s.
That was the 60s. So that's 3 generations ago. 4 generations.
So you think the evangelical world's about in the 1980s
maybe
now?
we've hit the 80s? I don't know.
So we're okay with women wearing big shoulder pads.
Yeah.
We're okay with like career women. No, we're not. Anyway.
Do you know that in the 1940s, a woman was found guilty of contempt of court in a courtroom in Los Angeles? Okay. She was actually thrown into
I'm
jail
scared.
at one
I'm
point.
scared by this story.
Do you know why she was found in contempt of court? 1940s, Los Angeles.
She was wearing pants.
You are correct.
I got it right.
You are correct.
Nice.
Because
that
she
was
showed
a
up
total
to
guess.
court wearing slacks, and the judge was outraged and said, if you show up again inappropriately dressed, I'm holding you in contempt. And she showed up in slacks again, and they put her in jail for 2 days.
That's kind of amazing.
So that's just 80
I'm
years
wearing
ago.
sweatpants right now because of my foremothers. look at all the barriers that have been broken.
Yep. There you go. There you go. Katelyn Beaty, thanks so much. It's the Beaty Beat on Substack, and it's saved by the city, which I don't know what that says about your soteriology, but I'll let that go. So check her out. And also all the books she edits. She's the editor for Skye Jatani. She's also the editor for Katelyn Schiess, not for Katelyn Beaty.
And Katelyn Beaty,
And
probably.
Katelyn Beaty. Yeah. So
Yeah.
who's doing better, would you say, Skye or Katelyn
Oh.
in hitting their deadlines?
Oh, I think actually they both turned in their manuscripts on time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean,
good.
now Skye has a forthcoming another book.
Yeah, running a little behind maybe.
Well, I don't
Little.
Yeah.
remind me
little
of the.
behind.
I don't remember the deadline.
That's fine. That's fine. It's quite all right. I have my
Yes.
own internal deadline.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah, like
it's what
that
your
I'm working
spirit.
toward.
like the horse.
what God is
in-
telling
like
you.
the horse in the airplane. I have my
do.
internal
No, like-
code of contact.
Like the gospel singer in the airplane.
Like
Yes.
Yeah.
God is telling you not
Yes.
to write your book.
Yes. And as every
In a
late
timely
author would sing in New York City, if I could turn back time. Okay, I think I've brought it all around. Thank you very
Yes.
much. Thank you, Katelyn Beaty and Skye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon, Holy Post Plus. And there's new stuff coming out this week, so go check it out. And we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
This episode is sponsored by Aura Digital Picture Frames. Having a camera in my pocket at all times is fantastic. I get great candid shots of my kids, my grandkids, my dog, all sorts of stuff. My dad lives in Michigan and only gets to see us a couple times a year. Same for Lisa's mom up in Minnesota. We try to send them pictures, but squinting at pictures in text threads on tiny phone screens is a lousy way to see your grandkids. And that's where the Aura digital picture frame comes in. It's a fantastic gift for our parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Wirecutter called it the best digital photo frame, and it's one of Oprah's favorite things. Wi-Fi enabled and super easy to set up with a high-resolution, high-quality screen. Now when I've got a great pic of the grandkids, it can pop up on my dad's picture frame with just a click. This is fantastic! From now through Black Friday and Cyber Monday, visit auraframes.com and get $40 off their best-selling Carver matte frame with the code HOLYPOST. This is their best deal of the year, so get yours now. That's auraframes.com, A-U-R-A frames.com, with the promo code HOLYPOST. Terms and conditions apply. And thanks to Aura Digital Picture Frames for sponsoring this episode. This episode is sponsored in part by World Relief, the humanitarian organization we trust to tackle the challenges at the southern border and around the world. This month, as we raise awareness about refugees, you'll hear about our recent trip to the U.S. southern border with World Relief, where we learned more about how they're serving refugees and other immigrants together with volunteers, local churches, and other partners. We hope you'll be challenged by what you hear, and that those of you with kids in your lives will bring them along in understanding how we can love and serve our refugee neighbors with the compassion of Jesus. For a limited time, World Relief is providing a Welcoming Refugees Family Guide that can help you dive into deeper discussions on the topic of immigration and refugees with your family. Download your guide today at worldrelief.org/holypost. As you lean into how you and your loved ones can walk alongside refugee and immigrant neighbors, I encourage you to consider partnering with World Relief through their monthly giving community that you've heard us talk about before, called The Path. Visit worldrelief.org/holypost to learn more today. That's worldrelief.org/holypost. And thanks to World Relief for sponsoring this episode.
All month we've been doing a special focus on the issue of immigration. We released a new explainer video about the history of U.S. immigration policy and how it's been impacted by racism, and we did an episode with Wheaton College professor Daniel Carroll about what the Bible says about immigrants, which is a lot more than you'd think. And we've had a number of articles on the issue at holypost.com. But a few weeks ago, a group of Holy Posters joined me for a trip to the southern border to get an up-close look at what's really happening. We talked to people for whom the immigration crisis isn't just political or theoretical. We met with church leaders in both Tijuana, Mexico and San Diego that are mobilizing to meet the needs of those trapped in this broken system. We talked to a U.S. border agent about his view of the mess, and we heard the stories of those legally seeking asylum in the U.S. and why a system designed to help the most vulnerable is now victimizing many of them instead. 4 of us from the trip reconnected recently to debrief our experience and explain what we learned. You'll hear from me, Kaitlyn Schiess, Old Testament professor and Holy Post pundit Carmen Imes, and Matthew Soerens from World Relief, who led the trip. And if you want to see some of what we saw, there are photos of the trip and a highlight reel available for Holy Post Plus subscribers. Here's the debrief of the Holy Post border visit. Hey everybody, I am joined today by our Holy Post pundit and Biola Old Testament professor Carmen Imes. Kaitlyn Schiess is also here, our co-host, and Matt Soerens, who is the vice president for advocacy and policy at World Relief. We were all on the visit recently to the southern border in Tijuana and San Diego. And Matt, you led that trip for us, and you're leading another one as we speak. You're back at the
same
border.
Hotel room, or at least the same hotel.
Well, thank you for joining us. I want to begin by talking about our experience one day. We visited the wall, or the fence, or the fences maybe would be the better way to put it, with a Border Patrol agent who gave us a tour of that area and explained his job, explained his perspective on what's happening on the border. And anyone want to just jump in and begin with what you remember from that experience and what stood out to you that you hadn't previously understood about the crisis at the southern border?
I'll say that I was surprised there were 2 walls. I didn't realize that there were 2 walls side by side. And I was really shocked when the Border Patrol agent told us that it takes about 10 minutes to climb over the first one with a homemade ladder. So we've got this multi-billion-dollar wall, and it's actually very easy to cross, which is why there's a second wall, because it slows people down enough that the Border Patrol agents can meet them by the time they're crossing over the second one. He showed us some of the ladders that people used to cross that you could just make in your backyard. And I was surprised at how easy that would be.
And it's worth pointing out that once somebody has climbed over the first wall, or the one that's closest to the Mexican side, when you're in between those two walls, you're on American soil at that point.
Yeah, yes.
So they can claim asylum even if they don't get over the second wall.
Right.
And it's just, the second one is just merely to slow them down. But the other thing that stood out was the agent explained to us that in the past, I think he said he's been working for 13 or 15 years and as a Border Patrol agent. In the past, somebody would get over and they would try to escape into the interior of the country. Now when someone climbs over the wall, they don't try to run. They're looking for a border agent because they want to be apprehended and they want to claim asylum, which is not the impression we tend to get from the news media about people who enter the country without documentation.
Right.
I think that's a really important shift that most Americans haven't realized is, that's not always been the case. As you said, 20 years ago, most people were crossing the border unlawfully and trying to evade the Border Patrol. There's still some of that happens. I think that's worth acknowledging. And that's actually where you have some actual security concerns. If someone's bringing something bad, they're not looking for the Border Patrol. But at least from the Border Patrol agent that we talked to, and I've heard this elsewhere at different points along the border, and it's borne out by the facts, the Border Patrol now thinks that it is interdicting 75+% of the people who are crossing. And that's some because they have more personnel and more infrastructure and more, all of that. But it's mostly because people are not trying to run away from them. They're trying to run to them because they want to seek asylum. And that's not to say that they all have a great case for asylum. Some of them do. Some of them don't. Most of them have no idea what the rules are for asylum. They have generally heard that this is a country that offers safety and opportunity for people fleeing hard things, which is not actually the precise language of our immigration laws.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we need to get into that. Sorry, go ahead, Carmen.
I was just going to say another surprise for me was learning that when people are going to climb over the wall, it's actually very expensive for them to do so because they have to pay the Mexican cartels for permission to climb that section of the wall. So that was really enlightening to me to hear what people go through to get to the wall, even to have the privilege of crossing over illegally.
Yeah. The agent, someone in our group asked the agent, who are you seeing come over? Mm-hmm. And he said in the past, again, it was primarily Mexicans, and there's still a fair number of them that come over. But he surprised me with his answer that I was expecting him to say Central Americans, and there's certainly plenty of that. But he talked about people coming from Central Asia. He said the stands, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Africa. I mean, these are places that are not, you can't walk to those places. I mean, you have to fly across the world in order to get to Central or South America and then take a treacherous journey all the way north to the Mexican-American border.
And then pay somebody off to be able to pass through safely. Yeah.
So again, I think the impression a lot of people have is it's Mexicans who are primarily coming through, or maybe Central Americans. And yes, that's there, but we don't hear about the people coming from all over the world crossing our southern border seeking asylum and refuge. Katelyn, you haven't...
It's worth noting that, I mean, he did share that, and it's true. It's a little bit anecdotal as well, because we do have data on what the top countries of origin are, and it is, actually last month was Venezuela was the top country of origin, I think for the first time ever. Mexico was number 2. Central American countries are high up there, Haiti, Colombia. So it is mostly Latin America, but it has always been, but perhaps increasingly so, there's this, at least a small number of people from the Eastern Hemisphere who are able to get somewhere in the Western Hemisphere and make a very difficult, very dangerous trip north. And they sometimes have some of the best asylum claims in terms of proving a well-founded fear of persecution if they're returned to their country of origin.
Katelyn, what about you from that visit to the wall? What stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, some of what Carmen and Matt have already said. Again, I really was one of those people who, I didn't think it was exclusively Mexican people crossing the border, but I did think that was primarily true. And it had not occurred to me what we heard throughout our trip, that there are plenty of Mexican nationals that are unhappy, you know, to have lots of immigrants in their country. And so it was even more meaningful, I think. Some of the people we met in Tijuana who as Christians felt like, no, this is my Christian duty to care for people who are not actually as similar to me as I tend to think they might be. They might be actually quite different in their language and their culture and their nation of origin, and still really care for them. In terms of standing on that borderline, though, the thing that I was struck by, you know, we had already been in Tijuana by the time we got to this point, standing at the border, talking to the Border Patrol agent, was how wild it is that it's so close. That, like, there is a world of difference between two places that are very close to each other. And especially because at that point we had met with churches on both sides of the border, I just kept thinking, and I was preparing to teach in my church on the communion of saints. And so I just kept thinking, like, how wild is it that what is more true of us than this border that we think is very real and very true and is real? I mean, it's significant, and I think borders are good things. But that there is something more real and true than that we have brothers and sisters that are quite close to us, actually, and their lives are very different, and those differences matter, but also we belong to them and they belong to us in this way that is more eternal and true than even this very real border wall in between us. And just that experience of standing there and seeing them and going, like, I can see houses. You can see quite a lot of detail. It was not very far away or, you know, very down below us. And so that was not something I had anticipated. It's very different to know that as a theological truth and then to stand there and think, wow, there's this really complicated immigration system. There's this very real difference in our experiences. And also they're very close. And also we really belong to other believers that are so close to us and are suffering in some significant ways.
Yeah, it was a very vivid image of where political and national realities intersect with spiritual realities, and the universal church being separated by a political border.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very vivid. One of the questions I asked the Border Patrol agent when we were looking, you know, we were standing on this hillside overlooking the wall, and we could see Mexico on the other side, and the disparity between the American side and the Mexican side. I asked him, what is the one thing you wish you had to do your job more effectively? And he kind of laughed and he said, comprehensive immigration reform, please. And then we had a conversation around why is that not likely? And he said there's no real political incentive to do that in Washington because that solution has to come from the government, the federal government.
And both sides are benefiting from the fear of the other side.
Yeah, both sides meaning Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, both sides being Democrats and Republicans benefit from leveraging the fears of their constituency to try to get elected, but actually solving the problem would then not necessarily help their case to get reelected.
Right, even though the current situation is hurting everybody.
Right.
It's hurting those trying to cross the border. It's hurting those in Mexico who have this influx of migrants and asylum seekers. It's hurting the American side because there aren't the resources necessary to care for and house all these people. So everyone's hurting in this except for arguably the politicians who are benefiting from it.
And the cartels
Matt,
on the Mexican side.
And the cartels. Very fair. Matt, can you explain a little bit to those listening who aren't familiar with what's going on, what is it about the U.S. asylum laws that are good but also contributing to the problems that we saw when we were at the border?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think having an asylum system is really important. And for Christians who believe in the sanctity of human life as made in God's image, it's really good that we have these laws that say if you can prove with documentary evidence that you have a well-founded fear of persecution for specific reasons under U.S. law, we will not send you back to potentially be killed. I think it's really important that we hold on to that and not give up on that. The challenge with that is that has become sort of the last legal opportunity to come to the United States. So you have people coming who absolutely meet that legal definition. And I've known many of those people. I've interacted with people in shelters in Mexico who I think will probably win their asylum claims. You also have people who really are fleeing extreme poverty. And what would be ideal for them would be a work-based visa, because it turns out we have literally millions of more jobs in the United States right now than we have people looking for work. And in some of the sectors like agriculture, where you wouldn't necessarily need to speak a lot of English to do that work. That's one of the fundamental challenges in our broader immigration system. And because those visas are not available, it's so starkly limited, people come to avail themselves to the last legal opportunity, which is asylum. Even with a maybe marginal case. And again, most of the time, it's not that they're trying to misrepresent something, just they have no idea who actually qualifies. And the effect right now, the other dynamic that's important to note is you theoretically could go seek asylum at the port of entry, the same place where the four of us crossed over with our passports. And the Biden administration now has an app to let you request an appointment at the port of entry. It's been described to me, and Katelyn, you will appreciate this, but I don't quite understand because I'm kind of culturally inept. It's like trying to get Taylor Swift tickets. Like, it's this app that if you have a good lucky day and a good Wi-Fi signal or cell reception and battery on your cell phone and a cell phone, you might be able to get an appointment a few months out. Some people we met in that church-based shelter we visited had been waiting, 6 months or more to try to get their appointment to go to the port of entry. But people have also heard, sometimes informed by TikTok or by profit-oriented smugglers, that U.S. law also allows you to request asylum if you reach the port of entry or if you reach U.S. territory other than that at a port of entry. That's explicit in Section 208 of our asylum laws. And that's a debate in Congress if it should say that, but it does say that. And that's part of why people who get desperate enough waiting for this app that doesn't work. And I will say the app's an improvement over what they had previously, which was literally like a notebook system where people would get a number. But it is funneling people in. And then you get this dynamic. Lots of them don't, pass the first step where they could pursue asylum in the United States. But for those who do, and that includes a lot of people from Venezuela, which is a serious crisis in our hemisphere, they get a court date somewhere in the United States that could be a year, 2 years out. A final court disposition will on average take 4 years before they actually determine if they've won their asylum or not. And for at least the first 6 months, and probably longer, because very few people come in with their asylum application, which will be like this thick, ready to file the day they arrive, they're not authorized to work. So you have this complicated limbo category of people. There's 1 million people right now who are actually not unlawfully present while they're waiting for the court determination and if they can be allowed to stay or not. But in many cases, they're not allowed to work. So having a lot of people come to the United States is not a big problem. Having a lot of people who are not allowed to work and support themselves, it turns out is a huge logistical challenge.
Yes.
Yeah. From what I learned from the border agent and from others throughout this trip, the way the system used to work, or the way the system is supposed to work, is someone seeking asylum enters the United States, whether at a port of entry or not at a port of entry. They enter the United States and they say, I am fleeing persecution, I'm fleeing whatever, I'm seeking asylum. Ideally, within a few days of them saying that, they are presented before a court, a judge, where they can make their claim for asylum, and a ruling is then given whether they have a legitimate claim for asylum or not. If they do not, they are returned to their home country. If they do, they are allowed into the United States and continue through the process of seeking asylum and legal residency. The problem is now there are so many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people claiming asylum that the system can't process them all. So rather than a few days or weeks between entering the country and having a hearing before a judge, there are years that go by. And that's who's flooding into the country or being redistributed to different cities throughout the country. And our system just can't handle it. And that overwhelmed system means that it's ripe for abuse. People can come in who have no legitimate claim for asylum, but they can seek asylum knowing that it's going to take a couple years for anyone to figure out whether or not I should be here or not. And it also interferes with those who have legitimate claims. And we heard many of those stories as well. So the system is overwhelmed and broken, and that's why people will climb over the fence and seek a border agent and say, I'm claiming asylum, because they know it's a way to be in the United States legally for at least a couple of years before you go see a judge.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's also worth noting that there are people who will eventually, like among people who got an asylum decision in immigration court last year, 47% were granted asylum and a slight majority were denied. And then there was others who didn't finish their case or who were administratively dismissed. But there's a lot of legitimate asylum claims. And that's why the policy solution that some people have, which is let's just stop asylum, means sending tens of thousands of people back to a situation where eventually a U.S. judge will probably determine they faced a well-founded fear of persecution or even of death. But as it's structured right now, it is completely dysfunctional. And there are really good policy solutions to this and there's leaders on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, coming forward with legislation. One thing we've supported at World Relief is called the Dignity Act that would dramatically increase asylum adjudication capacity. It would also create campuses at the border where people could be held in humane settings to have that initial processing done. instead of being held between the border fences, which is what's happening here in San Diego right now in some cases. That bill has Republican and Democratic co-sponsors, but not nearly enough to pass into law. And it does a lot of other really positive things from our perspective, with immigrants who've been in the country for 20 years who would be able to pay a fine and earn permanent legal status, dreamers who be able to get citizenship. It has some real support. It's a thoughtful bill. It's not perfect, but it's like a really good faith effort for Republicans and Democrats to come together. And the frustrating thing is it would take a significant change in the political winds for that to actually become law right now.
So let's talk about, short of a political solution to this problem, we got to witness what the impact of this problem is on both the Mexican side of the border and the U.S. side. We spent a day in Tijuana, including visiting a Baptist church there that is housing people who are waiting for the app to give them permission to seek asylum in the U.S., to go to the border crossing and begin the process. What impressions did you walk away with from that visit, talking to those people seeking asylum, to the Christians in that church in Tijuana who are caring for them and housing them? What did you guys learn from your experience there that day?
One thing I thought was really striking was we visited with a family from Haiti. Well, we tried to visit with a family from Haiti. They didn't speak Spanish, and they also spoke very little English. And just imagining trying to navigate the process of crossing through a country where you don't speak the language to get to another country where you barely speak the language. We were sharing cell phone pictures with each other, like just showing, oh, here's my family, and like having kind of a broken English conversation. But I was just struck by the diversity of the people who were waiting and wishing I could have really known all their stories.
Yeah, I loved, like I said earlier, I just spent this last weekend teaching the women's retreat at my church on the Communion of Saints. And I spent a bunch of time with them. We have some World Relief staff at my church, and there's a lot of people in our community that care about immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers in the U.S. But I spent a bunch of my time talking to them about what it was like, even just to hear from the pastor of this church, who had such a deeply Christian reason for caring for people. This was not just kind of abstract humanitarian interest in people. It was, we as Christians are called to care for people. And like I said earlier, I was especially struck by the idea that, she talked about how many people who come are Christians already, and some become Christians through the ministry of this church. And what a beautiful picture of the Communion of Saints is it to have all these people speaking different languages from different places, being cared for together in this church. And even just the sense of, we were brothers and sisters when we were in all these different places around the world. Like that was already true of us, that we belonged to one another. And then this church saw it as a gift to care for them. And then the folks that we met doing similar work on the other side in San Diego, very similar, deeply Christian reasons for doing that work. That just struck me, especially, as I said, as someone who lives in a city that has a lot of asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, including my own neighbors, some of whom are Christians and some of whom are not. But to think that this is not just a demand upon us because we're nice people that want to do a good thing, but this is a demand upon us both because Jesus said how we treat the poor and vulnerable is how we treat him, and for those who are other fellow believers. Like we have an even greater reason to say, ultimately, you are my family in a more deeper sense than my biological family, than the people who share a political party with me. Like ultimately, I have more in common with you, and I need to feel like that has a demand on my resources, on the way I vote, on how I spend my time and my money. And so that was just something I believed theologically before, but sitting in that room with those people and thinking, gosh, this is a better picture of heaven when people from every nation, tribe, and tongue will stand around the throne of God and worship him, than honestly anything that I see in my church at home, which I love, but does not look like we will look, together amongst the real communion of saints in eternity.
Yeah, I was inspired by it as well. And, people listening to this, when we say we went to a church in Tijuana, if you've not traveled to parts of the world that are significantly poorer than the United States, you might have an impression of what I mean by a church in Tijuana. But this is a church that is not resourced like most American churches. Mm-hmm. It's not a lavish facility by any means. It's incredibly simple. And every inch of that modest space was being used to care for these immigrants. And we think about how challenging it is here in the U.S. when you have an influx of people who have a lot of material needs. There's a lot of young families and children. They don't speak the language. The same thing is happening in Tijuana. You mentioned the Haitians. And yet these churches are using what they can and what they have to care for these people 24/7. They are living in the church. When this Baptist church in Tijuana started this ministry, they didn't have any showers or bathrooms or spaces to house people 24/7. And so they were living in their sanctuary. And it was a beautiful image of the church doing what Christ commanded the church to do. And there's no knowing how long an individual or family will be there because, again, they're all waiting every day, checking this app, hoping that they get the green light to go to the border crossing to seek asylum in the United States. So it was inspiring. And given the poverty and the challenges and the lack of resources, that these churches are still doing what Christ calls the church to do. Let's talk a little bit about what we did see on the San Diego side and some of the churches that were responding. Matt, can you begin by informing everybody kind of the way the system works? Once a family, a group of people enter the U.S. at the port of entry, they've gotten the green light through the asylum app to enter. They're processed at the border. What happens to them at that point?
Yeah, so first of all, it's important to know that not everybody gets in at that point. You get your interview,
Right.
and then you get this credible fear interview to determine, is it plausible that you're going to win your asylum claim, in which case we'll give you a court date. If not, you get returned. Either returned to Mexico under some negotiations with Mexico or deported back to your country of origin if it's not Mexico. But if you are allowed to pursue your court date, you might be detained in a detention facility. There are thousands of people who are held in sort of jail-like detention facilities every night. But that's not most people, because mostly there's not this capacity to do that for all the people arriving. And also there are appropriate laws that limit doing that with children. So a lot of these are families with kids involved. So then they're likely to ask you, where do you want your court date? Do you want it in Chicago? Do you want it in New York? Do you want it in Los Angeles? Do you want it in Boise, Idaho? Based on where you have a family or friend who's going to be your sponsor, who's going to receive you. So there's a guy in my church in Aurora, Illinois. He ended up in Aurora because he was a pastor in Mexico, and there's a family from our church who, when they spend a few months of the year back in Mexico where they came from originally, go to his church. And so that was the name he knew to say. He called them and said, would you possibly, give me a place to stay for a while I get on my feet? And his court date then was in Chicago, and he has an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracking unit on his ankle when he arrives so that the immigration authorities can make sure he is where he says it's supposed to be. He was told not to leave Illinois, Wisconsin, or Indiana. And then he's got his first court date more than a year after he arrived, and that's the first court date. And again, he's still waiting on work authorization because, it's a long process to get authorized to work.
But talk about, like in his case, I don't know where he entered the U.S., but if he hypothetically had entered in the San Diego border crossing and he says, I want my court date in Chicago, he's given a paper that says you have a court date on this day in Chicago, maybe it's in 2024, 2025. What happens to him between crossing in San Diego and arriving at your church in Aurora, Illinois?
Perfect. Yeah. So CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, will basically drop him off. So, hopefully coordinating with a church or a nonprofit on the U.S. side of the border. And in his case, that happened in El Paso, Texas. But we saw, we talked to a pastor who's a part of that happening in San Diego. A lot of it is led by churches, but also every sort of category of do-gooder who may not share, they may not be motivated by the Christian faith. And it's an interesting group of people who are coming together to say, how do we help these people who need short-term assistance, like a place to sleep for a night or two, while that sponsor is going to buy a plane ticket or a bus ticket, in most cases. And usually the churches are not the ones paying for that transportation because they don't have those resources, but they're trying to figure out how do we help people have a place to stay for a night or two and a shower and maybe a change of clothes because they might have been in the same clothes while they were detained for several days, and then get them on that bus or on that plane to where they're going. And again, one of the challenges is the people who actually don't know the name of someone to give, because we find that's been often the case with Venezuelans. Part of that is, if you're from Mexico or El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras, there's a long history of migration between these countries, and almost every Honduran I've ever met has a cousin somewhere in the United States. But Venezuelans are a lot less likely to have that because Venezuela 25, 30 years ago was a wealthy country. There wasn't this push to migrate to the United States. And a lot of those people have no idea where they should go. And that's where the governor of Texas in particular has basically been putting people on buses to Chicago, to New York, to other cities for some political reasons. And it's a much more challenging situation when you don't have the relative to receive you on the other end.
Yeah. So the thing that I was shocked by, and Carmen and Katelyn, please jump in when I'm done explaining this. What shocked me is that a group of asylum seekers enters in San Diego. They get processed. They're given their court dates for wherever they want to go in the country. And then the border agents will take a busload of these asylum seekers and just drop them at some bus station in the middle of San Diego or in a suburb of San Diego, and then say, good luck getting to Chicago. And that's it. And there's no plan to where to put them. They could well just be homeless on the streets. And if it wasn't for churches and a few other groups stepping in and receiving, they don't know how, it could be 50, 60 people a day that are being dropped off in their town. There's no way of knowing what happens to them. And it just seems like a completely ridiculous system that is relying on the goodwill of American citizens. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, these people would be destitute. Katelyn or Carmen, we interacted with some of the churches that are receiving those folks, not because they're obligated to, but just because they feel called to. What was your impression talking to some of those church leaders and the system that is in place to help these folks?
I was so inspired by the stories that we heard of churches that are like, oh, nobody has blankets. They're being held between the walls and they don't have blankets. Like, we need to bring them blankets and pass them between the bars of the wall. Or, oh, they don't have a place to stay or a ride to the airport. Let's go help. It's a small church that's mobilized to help meet these needs. One of the stories that the pastor shared with us was, he said he feels like he's living the story of the Good Samaritan, where he's tried to contact pastors of large churches in his area to say, hey, we need some help. Like, here's some very practical, tangible ways to contribute. And they've all said no. And yet when they show up at the wall to help pass blankets to asylum seekers who are being held between the walls, he says the people who are there on the front lines of helping these vulnerable people are the LGBTQ Alliance and the anarchists. And he's like, where are the churches? I was so struck by that sort of parable that he's living, wondering, where is the church? Now, there is also the issue of, like, where is the government? Why is the government unable to actually facilitate its own processes?
Right.
But in the face of such a big human need, you would think that the church would step up, and many of them are not.
And the explanation that he heard from trying to get other church leaders mobilized was political primarily. There's, especially in conservative evangelical churches, there is a resistance to aiding people who are entering the country in an undocumented way, even though technically asylum seekers are not illegal. They are pursuing the legally mandated process for entering the country.
Right.
The perception from some evangelicals is, no, they're illegal and shouldn't be helped. And so that's why it's hard to mobilize these churches. Katelyn, your impression of that whole broken system?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Carmen, I was really struck by how one of the pastors that we met with talked about it as just like similar to the church in Tijuana, of just like, okay, people are here, we have to do something. Like, not so much of, I'm at a Presbyterian church, we have a committee for everything. Like, there's sometimes so much process that we'll put in place, and some of these Christians just, dealing with the need that's right in front of them. The other thing I was so struck by throughout our whole trip was, Skye, you and I just spent a Getting Schooled episode talking about different levels of government and kind of people knowing, what does my local government, what does my state government, what does the federal government do? And thinking about how, especially next year in a difficult election year, people are making decisions about, how do I balance all of these competing things that I care about, that I think God cares about? I can't vote for one presidential candidate that will fit everything that I believe is good and true in the world. And really, this whole trip really struck me with, okay, well, first of all, there are things you can do at different levels. On a first, just like personal political level, which I still think is a political thing, is building your community together, is you as a church or you as a community group or you as a family in one house can do things to kind of meet the needs of people basically wherever you live in the U.S. But it also struck me that there's so much, as we've said over and over again, that can only be done at the federal level to actually structurally fix a really broken immigration system. And so it convicted me of, there are lots of things that actually the federal government doesn't have as much say in, that we put at the federal level. We say, I want a president that believes X, Y, Z. And a lot of that stuff does only happen at the local level or the state level. And so I would just encourage people to pay attention to, when you are balancing or juggling all of these different things that you care about, recognizing at what level what things really make a difference. And when it comes to, on a structural level, our immigration system, that's something to like weight more heavily when you're thinking about the votes that you do that impact the federal government for the president or for your state representatives, because that's where a lot of this stuff has to happen. There are other concerns you might have that you want to represent in your full political participation, but they might be better represented at a more local level for your state government or for, your really local government.
Yeah, I mean, for some people listening to this, no doubt it feels like a faraway problem. Maybe you live in a town where you just don't see this, but I hope people can begin to get their minds around the magnitude of this problem. Imagine wherever you live, your church, your community, imagine if every single day 50 people were just dropped into your town, families, children, with nowhere to live, no food, no transportation. Maybe they speak some English, maybe they don't. 50 people. What would your church do? How would you find housing for them every night? What do you do when the cheap hotel rooms are all filled up? How many people would open their homes to strangers and let them in to live there? How do you get them plane tickets within a few days to get to where they need to go for their asylum cases? And then how do you do that every single day when the next morning you wake up and there's 50 more people dropped at your doorstep?
Yeah.
And the fact that there are churches that are saying we won't help because we don't like the politics of this. The politics of this doesn't matter for whether or not those people get food and a place to live and warm clothing. We need a political solution, as Katelyn said, on the federal, local levels, but we can both pursue that and care about the people who technically are here legally. They have a legal right to be in this country because they've claimed asylum. And it was just heartbreaking to hear that there were churches refusing to help, while it was deeply inspiring on both sides of the border to hear the stories of the Christians and the churches that are helping. We're about out of time, but before we go, Matt, couple things. Do you want to just give people some direction on what they can do if they're not seeing, tangible things in their community, but where can they go to either learn more or help with those churches that are on the front lines of this situation?
I mean, one thing to know is those people don't stay at the border. So like they're in Chicago as well, Skye. They're
Right.
in, they're in cities, maybe not every small town, but they are in cities really across the country. And I know World Relief is involved in Chicago, for example. We're at the police station and partnering with some churches that are providing shelter in the city of Chicago. But even if you're not in that spot, if you're, far from where this is affecting you directly, there are immigrants in your community. They might have been there 20 years working in agriculture. And there are opportunities to, just be kind to the people in your community, be a friendly face, get to know them and their stories. There's ways that World Relief can assist with, even the refugee resettlement process, which is a whole different process and actually a much more functional process where people are identified as having fled a well-founded fear persecution overseas, vetted overseas, and come on an airplane. We can do that anywhere in the country now through something called the Welcome Corps, and there's information on the World Relief website on that. The last thing I would say is, do your homework. Go back to the Bible, especially as we enter into a political season. For years, we have this 40-verse Bible reading guide. And I mean, it's intentionally simple enough to not tell you how to interpret those passages. We'll let experts like Dr. Imes do that. But most people can read a verse a day and realize, wow, the Bible says a lot on this theme. And then, ask God, how would that inform how I speak to my members of Congress, who I vote for president? And we're not going to tell you that, but we want you to ask the Holy Spirit to help you think through that from a biblical perspective, in addition to doing the work of how do we come alongside local churches in my own community, along the border. World Relief is a part of that, paying some of the costs for that shelter that we visited. And then even beyond that, we're in Haiti. We're working with local churches in Haiti to try to address some of the dynamics that are making people have to leave in the first place. And we want to welcome people when they do have to leave, but we also want to, we don't want situations anywhere in our world where people feel they have no choice but to leave their homes. And we think the church is actually part of what is God's primary solution to address those situations.
Thanks. Before we go, a reminder that throughout this month we've been talking about immigration as an issue, and we do have other resources through the Holy Post as well. Dr. Imes has written a really provocative piece for us at holypost.com called "The Torah is Pro-Immigrant, Nehemiah Was Not," which you're laughing. I suppose you've gotten some feedback to this piece.
I'm laughing, Skye, because I did not title this article, nor did I choose the pictures that you put with it.
Welcome to editorial oversight.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating piece because you talk about what the Old Testament says about immigration, what Yahweh says about immigration, and how the application of that was not great, frankly, from Nehemiah and Ezra, and create some cognitive dissonance as we read the scriptures around these issues. But really thoughtful piece. We're doing some live streams this month to go deeper into the issue. I released a deep dive on the history of immigration on YouTube. It's about an 18-minute video looking at how racism has deeply influenced U.S. immigration policy. And we hope that you'll stay just up to date on our regular podcast feed, because we've had different guests coming on to talk about this issue, and all with the goal of helping to inform all of you on the complexity of it, the biblical roots of this, the policy issues that are at stake, and hopefully some inspiration of the stories of Christians who are doing really good work to care for their sisters and brothers in this ongoing mess. So thank you all for both taking time to go to the border, for debriefing here today on some of what we learned, and we look forward to interacting with all of you in the comments about this episode. Thanks for being here.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Mike Strelo. Editing by Area Code Audio. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.